Well, this week's, I was going to say victim, which sounds a little too sort of intimidating. It's not a victim at all. But this week's guest is Nick Jackson. Nick's been part of our church for a little while, and it's a delight to have some time with you, Nick, this afternoon, along with one of your two border collies. And I think this one's Melody, is that right?
Yes, she's decided she wants to play right now.
Okay, so should you know, this not go so well, we'll just we'll allow you to do your dog tricks with Melody.
I'll get bored in a minute.
Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Cumbria, a town called Whitehaven, which is on the right on the west coast of Cumbria, in the middle, sort of. Not far from Salford nuclear plant, and it's the start of the C2C. So occasionally people have started the bicycle ride over to Newcastle and Tynemouth from there, and it's got a very average rugby team. So back when it was slightly better, various people from Salford have made the trip, I believe, at points.
Okay.
But yeah.
What was it like growing up there?
It's quite a small town. Yeah, there isn't a lot going on. Most people know each other. Most people are related to each other. Certainly it was the sort of place where kind of, a few years ago, you wouldn't have left. And chances are you'd have spent your entire life in that kind of bit of West Cumbria. Certainly if you're a miner or a steel worker, it was kind of the industries that had kind of had died out basically by the time I was born. But yeah, previously, I think my granddad joined the Navy basically to get out of that life, and get out of kind of, going down the pit, and wanted to see some places. So those were your options.
Okay. But for you, your option was to come to Salford in UK. What was it? How did that feel at the time, coming from Whitehaven to come to?
So I applied for Lancaster and didn't get in to uni, and ended up going to Salford Uni, having never ever been up until the day I moved down. Turned up to Castle Earl, as it was then, which is a less than cheery accommodation area for Salford Uni, and now doesn't exist, which is a blessing to anyone who starts there now, that they don't have to make that choice. So I think because I was from quite a small town, kind of the idea of Lancaster, a quiet little place up on the hill in Lancashire, was kind of quite a comfortable idea, whereas Salford and kind of Manchester, I remember getting the bus in to Manchester, having never really been. I think we popped in on the Sunday afternoon when I moved down, but otherwise, it was like, okay, this is a big city by comparison to 18 years or so living in a tiny little town on the west coast of the UK.
You were at uni, sort of like there was a whole bunch of you that people like Tony and Jem, or Phil and Hannah. Was Ian and Morag around at that sort of time?
They'd all left by the time I turned up, but I met Tony and Jem over because they cooked for the CU house party, because they still had we had kind of crossover friends. I imagine they remember it because I fell on a manhole cover that weekend and fairly wounded my chin in quite a pretty impressive way, which is, I eat quite a lot, so the jaw movements to eat any of the food that Tony and Gemma were lovingly making every day were excruciating, to say the least.
While you were there was through university that you made a friendship with Mia. Around that time.
Yeah, so I'd left. I moved down in 2006, and had left a couple of years later, deciding I wasn't going to do university. And I think a friend of mine who'd kind of met in that period via church had taken so long to finish his degree that Mia was there by that time, and I think we met on a trip to the cinema one night. I think it was in McDonald's in St Anne's Square, of cheery places. I think that was about 2012. Yeah, okay. So I'd been down here a few years by that point.
How romantic, McDonald's and St Anne's Square. And you've been married how long?
We are on...
Get this right.
4 and a bit years. Yeah, 4 and a bit.
Good for you. Good for you. So you kind of you'd come from this sort of small town into the big city. You'd had to make that adjustment, and then realised that perhaps this university life was not really for you. That you weren't thriving there. So you had to take the rather brave step of stepping away. And what did you do then?
Yeah, I don't think I did a lot till it must have been about November 2008. And I'd finished uni in like May 2008. It was kind of around the time that kind of people were not taking anyone on. So there wasn't a lot of work about because we were in kind of the early stages of the financial crash that then lasted for the next 4 or so years. So there wasn't a huge amount going on. So I did a few various bits of work experience, bits of casual labour here and there. And then spent 12 months at the Message from about November 2008. And I was working with their schools bands for a while, did that for 12 months. Which was handy because, kind of lots of experience of getting kind of gigs in and out of doors at 6 a.m. in the morning before the school started on Monday.
So you were doing the sort of techie side of it all?
Yeah, so we would go in with the bands and put in a, PA for them, and then we'd do like an end-of-week gig, effectively, at the end of a week in school with a specific band or, a drama group or what have you. I was kind of facilitating that, which was a weird time because while I was there, they sort of decided that wasn't what they wanted to do anymore. They like to make random decisions that then go out the window 5 minutes later.
So after that, when your time with the Message had come to an end, you then became a freelance.
Yeah, I went freelance because it was 2009 and things, people just didn't want to employ people at that point, and certainly in corporate world, that there just wasn't a lot going on. So I was like, well, I'll go freelance and see how that goes because it's the less risky route for people. I kind of a couple of brutal years earlier on. It took a few years to get going because it was a bit quiet. So definitely some months where it was a little bit tight, and still living down here because the idea to try and do work in kind of entertainment and events and living in Cumbria just doesn't really work. So moving back home wasn't really an option. So I still had to try and maintain some income to kind of stay down here. That must have been about 11 and a half, 12 years ago, I think.
It's kind of interesting because you talk about those sort of brutal years when there was not much work around. I know that Mia at the moment is she's working in the pharmacy, isn't she? She's down at what was Hope Hospital, Salford Royal. But for yourself at the moment, we're back in difficult days because sort of like literally overnight everything was cancelled. And
I think the last thing I did was I went up to Glasgow on I think it was like the 14th of March or something. Kind of getting the impression that the gig was going to cancel, but I still had to travel up because I didn't want it to go ahead and still be left with a 3-hour trip at 9 o'clock at night or something with an early start the following day. And I got up there, and by about 7 o'clock in the evening, we were sat in the hotel. It was cancelled, and I drove back the following day. And the lead up to that whole being kind of stuff, kind of gradually kind of going, we're not going to go ahead. And then the following few weeks after that was just, we're not going to ahead. This is going to be cancelled. And some of it's been, was so close to the wire that they've paid some of the fees. But not all of it. Certainly anything that was in quite far ahead. But yeah, I don't think. I think it's kind of clear till September now. We're expecting.
I guess for self-employed people, you always kind of live with the not knowing where work's going to come from and praying and you know, hoping that one job will lead to another and all the rest of it. But how do you cope yourself when actually, I mean, this has been so unusual, but in the midst of this happening, what effect does it have on you, and how do you cope with it?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of periods of it being a bit quieter over the years. You know, kind of in the early days, it was tricky, and then I think about 2014, I probably had about 12 or 18 months where a few things had dried up, and there wasn't a lot coming up. So yeah, kind of those early days of getting used to not knowing where, you know, the next paycheck was going to come from were probably quite helpful at the minute. Because you just sort of learn to, the stuff does come along, and that, you know, actually you probably just need to relax a little, not entirely. You're still going to be making, keeping in touch with people, making connections. But, you know, I've certainly had kind of 6-month periods, pretty tricky periods before. Yeah, I guess the difference with this time is we don't really know what the end point is.
Yeah, there's no...
So it's very tricky to plan. I don't think anyone who's involved in you know, this kind of work is expecting very much before 2021, really. But we shall see.
How does it affect the way, for example, that you pray?
It makes it all very about one thing, or has a tendency to do, and I don't think that's helpful. So it's trying to not fall into that trap of, oh, I just need work. And, you know, it's not. You don't necessarily need work. You just need to be able to live, and that provision doesn't always come the way you expect it to. Yeah, I think it's trying not to allow your focus to become all about finding employment and finding cash, and because that I think that's the point where it becomes hard to deal with it, because you're just self-perpetuating quite a lot of negative thoughts. And
I suppose that's true not just of yourself, but it's almost like for any of us, when we've got any obvious need, it's easy for the need to become the dominating thing on our horizon. So on the one hand, we pray about it, but actually the line between prayer and worry isn't actually that thick sometimes, and it just dominates the whole of us rather than seeing a bigger picture.
I mean, we've been kind of fortunate. I'm not the only income in the household. Me is very busy and working, but, you know, I've got colleagues who have 3 children, 3 or 4 children, are the only income because, you know, their partner or wife's not working, and they really are in a, how are we going to get through this with literally nothing overnight? And I think there's so many people who live literally paycheck to paycheck that I think will be biting for a lot of people. So I feel quite fortunate in a lot of ways to not be quite at that stage.
It sounds like that expensive date at St. McDonald's has paid off. I'm interested to know about you know, your life as a Christian and faith, and when faith became real for you. When did you kind of own it for yourself, and what was going on at that time?
Yeah, so I moved down here, and obviously I've been going to church. My parents had taken me since I was born, and so, you know, that was kind of a bit of a decision point, really, because you can kind of coast along up until that stage, I think, or not. I did sort of kind of, I think I've probably coasted through my teens, and then when I kind of moved down here, you know, I had to make an active decision to kind of still go along to church and find one. So yeah, and then of course I think those early years of kind of having to really kind of trust that you know, looking for work was going to happen kind of teaches you quite a bit about it not being entirely up to you, and having to trust God's provision. And so yeah, I think that was probably quite cementing, because I think it was the first point at which I'd kind of really had there's 10 quid in the bank and there's nothing coming up. I don't think I'd experienced having to rely properly before that stage. So yeah, I think, I kind of, over that kind of first kind of few years down here, it was fairly cementing.
That's a really interesting answer and reflection, that you sort of you go from as a child, you know, being swept up in the life of the church, you know the stories, you know all about it, but actually it's almost in the work context of the insecurity of work.
Yeah, when you come from quite a relatively middle class background, I don't think you often don't really understand quite what it is to kind of really have to rely on God for anything particularly. I don't think that link's quite as obvious, because you've not struggled at any point particularly, and maybe if you did, you maybe weren't aware. So it's only when you kind of start doing life independently and having to make those decisions for yourself that I think you really understand what that means.
And indeed, once you recognise that perhaps you don't have quite as much power as you might have thought you had,
definitely,
that you are actually much more reliant upon the grace and the provision of God than you might have felt. Well, certainly might feel comfortable with. So, as you look back over the years, what would you say you've learned about God? What have you come to appreciate most?
I think this is a great example, because we're in the midst of quite a tricky time, and the reality is that decisions that were made in kind of January and February, kind of left me in a pretty good place. And so actually, he will always provide, and you will always, even if you don't understand quite why you're going through a tricky patch, there's always something on the other side of that, and an understanding you gain. So often, you might go through a tricky patch and then discover something about yourself which you didn't understand. So,
that's quite powerful.
I enjoy the sense of humour of it all, at times, because often, the figuring out that happens, I think, is
it's the old joke, isn't it? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. It's that sort of
that was a good way of putting it.
Yeah, that sort of sense that we feel so sure, and yet actually what we're doing is we're coming to the one who holds us, and I think for you to be able to reflect on that in your context right now is actually quite powerful, much more powerful than someone else simply talking about it from.
Yeah, we couldn't get, it's just stuff like we were going to do some work on the house, do some painting and decorating, and we couldn't get the person to come to do it, and they just, we just couldn't tie them down to a date and a time, and so we never ever spent the money, and it was like, it was A, that we didn't start it because we'd still be living in chaos, and B, we've not spent the cash on on having them do it. So
Nick, thanks for your time, and I would want people in the church to remember yourself and the many other folks actually who are similar to you in self-employed contexts, that you would know the provision of God in these days, and that that you'd know him better as well. But thanks for your time. I think there would be certain people
quite a lot of it.
Yeah, that's good. I think there'll be certain people in the church who will be disappointed that we didn't have more of melody in this particular film, but maybe that's for another day.
I think he got bored after I wasn't really playing particularly.
All right. Well, bless you. Thank you very much, and please do give our best to Mia when she eventually gets back.
Take care.
All right.